There's a few more coming through now, but we'll get things kicked off. This evening we've got James joining us to give us a run through one of his latest talks, looking into heuristics and their importance within the environment. For those that have been with us the last couple of weeks, you'll be used to the format for questions at the end. So James will go through his talk, give examples and a slight demo, and then he will open up for questions at the end. If everybody can use the Slido function, I'll share the details with you shortly. But yeah, if you go onto slido.com, put QA1 in and start to ask your questions from there, and then we can come back to those at the end. You can see them on the screen now, and the QR code, so I'll leave those up for a couple of minutes. Just as always, if obviously we are a recruitment agency, so for anybody that has any questions around the current market, or if any questions around opportunities coming up, or even just a general chat, feel free to reach out to me at the end. I'm happy to have a chat with you anytime in the week and run through where things are for us at the moment. Also, if anybody would like to talk in the future, then again, we're always looking for speakers, so feel free to reach out to me as well. So I'll take that down now. I'll share the details in the chat function on Zoom, but if everyone can go onto Slido and ask their questions, we'll come around to those at the end. But without further ado, I'll pass over to James.
Okay, hello. I will share my screen. Share. Is it coming through? Hope it is. All right, I want to talk about heuristics today in the context of software testing excellence. Let's start here. So, years ago, I was young. I started as I was a developer first. I started as a developer when I was 16, and then I did the video games for several years. Then I was hired at Apple Computer as the youngest manager in the R&D division at that time. So I was 20 years old, and they hired me as a test manager, and I didn't know how to test, and it was a dumb idea to hire me as a test manager, but they did, and I was grateful, and I decided I loved testing. I loved it more than development. I decided I wanted to be very, very good at my job, and soon I came to feel this is my career now. My career isn't technical work. My career is testing work. So how do I get good at this now that I have ambition? This is what I knew at the time. Somebody who knows testing could watch me and guide my work. Or maybe I'm just super good at testing, and I'll discover that I automatically get good or am good without much effort. Maybe I need experience. I remember my boss told me at the time, "You need seasoning," he said, because I challenged him about how come I wasn't better paid. I looked at the description of the engineer level 3 at Apple, and I said, I'm doing an engineer level 3 stuff, and I'm being paid as an engineer level 1. How does that make sense? And my boss said, well, you need seasoning. What's seasoning? Can you describe what seasoning is? And he couldn't. I'm never going to tell anybody that you need seasoning and then stop talking. I now know how to describe what experience really means, what it really is. But at the time, he couldn't, and I didn't know either. It was just this magical thing. Well, how about practice? Through trial and experiment, I get better at this. What about procedures? I could follow explicit instructions created by someone who's skilled, or maybe created on my own. These were the methods that I knew to get good at something. But there's an important thing that's missing here, and I'll get into that. But first, I'm going to have some problems with this. I didn't have a supervisor. My boss wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. He was a second level manager. He's in meetings all the time. I might have natural talent, but I didn't want to rely on nature. I didn't want to wait for experience. I'm not sure what to practice. And I don't like following procedures. And when I did follow procedures, I felt like I was doing bad work. So I felt really stuck here. Well, here's what I didn't know in 1987. That I would learn through the decade of the 90s, and then I feel I would master in the 2000s and learn to teach effectively in the course of the last 20 years. This is what I teach now. And so I'm saving you guys a lot of time if you don't already know these things. I'm going to save you years of head scratching. There are three big things: mental models, bootstrapping, and heuristics. When you see these clearly and understand their role in your work today, you will feel powerful. You will feel clear, coherent. You will begin to feel like an expert in your field. And until you do understand these things, I predict you won't feel like an expert. Even if you write a book on testing, you'll still feel in your heart of hearts you don't really know what you're doing. Okay, so these three things: mental models, bootstrapping, and heuristics. I'm not going to talk much about mental models and bootstrapping. In fact, I'm going to drop it after this slide. I talk about it in other places in my other classes, but I'll just tell you what they are. Okay, a mental model is a structure in your mind that allows you to make sense of or interact with the world, something in the world. So we've got to develop a mental model of our products, or we cannot test them effectively. We must develop a mental model of testing, or we cannot test effectively or systematically. We won't be able to explain or defend our testing to other people. It's the fact that I have a mental model of testing that allows me to teach testing to other people. There are books on mental models. There's different kinds of techniques I can talk about, how you form mental models consciously but also unconsciously. We can get into cognitive biases, all kinds of interesting things about that. But let me set that aside. The second thing is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is about how to do something when you don't know how to do it, when you have no plan. How do you do something when you have no plan? You do it by being confused and by being unafraid of your own confusion. That's what stops a lot of people. They're confused, they don't know what to do, and so they don't do anything. To bootstrap is to allow yourself to be confused and yet still explore and grow and find a way through the fog. And so there's emotional aspects to that, there's intellectual aspects to that, there's specific techniques I could share with you. The concept of highly exploratory testing is a bootstrapping methodology applied to software testing. Now, bootstrapping doesn't mean that you stay in that confused state. You work through it and you work into precision and efficiency. But the key insight of the bootstrapping idea is that the way to get to efficiency and precision, always, in every case, it moves through confusion. So if you think you're doing good work, but you were never confused, you're probably not doing good work. You probably just copied something someone else is doing and you don't really understand it. And this is true whether you're building software, whether you're testing, whether you're building a boat, whether you're building a house, whether you're courting someone and developing a relationship. If you're in a relationship with another adult human and you've never experienced pain, confusion, trouble, then you really don't understand how relationships work. You are still in that first happy path part of your relationship. I've been married 29 years. I know about this very deeply. But now let me move to heuristics. Okay, so these three things, really important. The angels sing of them, and nobody told me about these things when I started out. I had to learn about them by reading books on cognitive science and epistemology and philosophy and activity theory and all kinds of stuff, sociological stuff. Now I know about them. Now I can pass them on to you, and I pass them on to my students. But let me talk about heuristics now. This is what a heuristic is. It's a fallible means of solving a problem. That's it. Full stop. The problem is that that seems such a simple thing to say, and the implications of it are so profound and far-reaching that almost everybody doesn't understand what I'm talking about when I just say this is what a heuristic is. It's any fallible means of solving a problem. That's it. That's a heuristic. Now, sometimes when I ask people, like, "What? Have you ever heard the word heuristic? You know, what do you think it is?" Some people have heard the word. It's not a very popular word in our field, but it should be. Sometimes people say, "Oh, a heuristic, that's like an experience-based way of solving something." Heuristics are not necessarily based on experience. You can have zero experience heuristics. Heuristics that are based completely on mathematical equations that were derived logically and have nothing to do with experience. Sometimes people say a heuristic is an approximate solution to a problem. It's not necessarily an approximation. It might be something extremely precise. Sometimes people say it's a good enough answer. It's not necessarily a good enough answer. A heuristic may actually lead to the best answer that could possibly be. And heuristics aren't even necessarily ideas or processes. I would argue that a hammer is a heuristic. Now, a hammer is a physical object. It's a lump of metal in a certain shape. But it is a fallible means of solving the problem of attaching two pieces of wood via the process, the heuristic of a nail. Now, you can hit your thumb with the hammer, which won't solve your problem. In fact, it'll create a problem for you. So a hammer is fallible. You have to use it with skill, but it still is a means of solving a particular problem that you have. Certain kinds of problems, and you look around for a hammer to solve that problem. Meanwhile, a hammer won't solve other things. So the implications of this are far-reaching. Now, if you're the studious kind of person, I recommend that you read a book called Discussion of the Method by Billy Cohen, and maybe Michael Bolton will type that in the title of that or the reference to that book into the chat right now, because he's probably going to find that on Amazon. That's the book. I had known about heuristics before, but when I read Discussion of the Method, it caused fireworks to go off in my mind. It really got me to understand how heuristics are everywhere. Billy Cohen is a engineering professor who works in the world of civil engineering, and his point is that heuristics are the fundamental underlying construct in all of engineering. And I came to agree with his point of view on that. So I found him very inspiring to read. Here's some interesting kinds of heuristics. Physical tools, like I just talked about with a hammer. There could be trigger heuristics. Trigger heuristics are like alarm clocks. They're methods for alerting you when certain things are happening. There are radiator heuristics. That is something that beams information at you. So a speedometer or a chart is a radiator. There are decider heuristics. They help you actually make a decision, such as, you know, a green traffic light saying, hey, you can just keep driving, you don't have to stop. Policies are heuristics. Test cases in the testing world are heuristics for finding bugs. Of course, we have many other heuristics for finding bugs, and I don't find test cases in general to be a particularly effective kind of heuristic. But anytime you write a test case, you're not saying, this is guaranteed to find a bug. What you're saying is, I think if we perform this procedure, or we honor this test idea and we implement it, if there's a bug, we will probably find it if it has these attributes. So that's very heuristic-y. Habits are heuristics. Neural networks are heuristics, including the neural networks that are in our own minds. So I hope what's starting to happen in your head is you're starting to say, well, wait, is just everything a heuristic? I mean, I would say that your eyes, for instance, are heuristics. They are heuristics physically embodied. Your eyes do not guarantee that you see everything that's actually there. Our bodies are made of heuristics. So maybe everything's a heuristic, but not quite. Here's something that's not a heuristic. An algorithm is not a heuristic. So, for instance, long division. If you divide two numbers, divide one number into another number using the procedure of long division, that is an algorithm. That gives you a guaranteed result within the formal system of numbers. Within that game, you can say, the procedure of following these moves will always get you to the correct answer of what is this number divided by that number. So there are things that are not heuristic in the world. It's just that none of that is something that we can directly use in testing. There are no non-heuristic testing methods. That is to say, there is no method of testing that guarantees you will find every bug without wasting your time finding things that aren't bugs. We just don't have access to that sort of thing. We can use algorithms to help us test, but when we use them, they become heuristics. Here is an example of that. Long division can be used to divide numbers, natural numbers, rational numbers, correctly. But if you use long division to decide who's going to pay what at a restaurant, you are not guaranteeing that everyone is going to be happy. So imagine somebody paid £1 for something, somebody paid £2 for something, or they ordered something that was worth £2, £1, £2. Someone else buys something that's £72. You divide that by 3. One guy gets a good deal. The other two have to pay a lot of money. They're probably not going to be very happy with that. So, yes, you can use an algorithm to try to solve a human problem in a social system. But if you do that, it becomes a heuristic because it's not guaranteed to make those people happy. It only guarantees it's going to get you the right number relative to the world of division. So anything, including algorithms, that you use as a heuristic is a heuristic in that situation. And then your next question should be to me, so what? So what, James? All right, we get it. You see heuristics everywhere. They're like fairies. They're like they are everywhere until you look at them, and then they disappear, and they giggle as they disappear behind the flower. So they're everywhere. What difference does it make that the world is invested with these animal spirits? How does this help us? Good question. Very good question. So here's how it helped me. When I learned that all testing is based on heuristics and not algorithms and scripts, these are the immediate practical effects that I enjoy today. I don't waste my time looking for best practices because there are no best practices. Everything's heuristics. All they are heuristics. There's no best heuristic. There are just different heuristics that solve problems in different ways and give us different advantages and disadvantages. When you know that everything is fallible, then you start looking for how are things fallible. What could go wrong if I script my testing? What could go wrong if I try to automate what I do when I test? And that's very practical. I realize testing cannot be automated because human judgment is required whenever you have a heuristic around. The first implication, actually, of heuristics, because they're fallible, the first implication of that, which is not stated, is if you're using fallible methods to solve a problem, then you have to have a responsible person to be accountable for that failure if it fails. You can't just say, I'm going to put this thing in place that I know might not work, and then I'm going to walk away and ignore it when it fails. That's an irresponsible attitude. So knowing that things can fail mean that I have to stay involved and accountable for the work I do in the technical world. Now, of course, I can delegate it to someone else, but then they better be skilled people. Another thing I did is I started noticing all the heuristics that I was using, which I hadn't noticed before. I began curating them. I began naming them. And this makes me more powerful. This makes me able to test systematically in ways that other people don't, because I have named 100 heuristics, hundreds of heuristics. I have many, many heuristics that I can give names to, so that when I'm working, I can list the heuristics I'm using. I can deconstruct them. I can tell you what they are. I can describe how to use them. I don't just shrug and say, I'm testing, which is what most people seem to do. When I ask them, how are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Because I have experience, and this is how I do it, and stop yelling at me, they say. You know what happens when people ask me, how am I working, and why do I think it's good, and how do I know that it's not a bad way to do things? Instead of getting defensive, I get happy. I am happy. Because to me, if you do that, what you're saying to me is you are ready to listen to me as I explain my work. My work must matter to you. I'm so excited that I finally get to share my thoughts about what I'm doing and why it's worthwhile with another human being. Because let me tell you, most people aren't willing to sit there in that chair for 2 hours while I go on and on and on about every little detail and nuance about my work. I am so happy. By the way, I've had the doors locked behind you. You cannot escape. I'm going to explain all of my testing now. I'm excited, not taken aback, when someone says, prove that that's good testing. Now, you will be excited too once you start feeling like a testing expert. And those of you in this Zoom that feel like a testing expert, you know what I'm talking about. You know that it's fun for you to talk about testing. You don't feel like it's just a matter of time before someone finds out you don't know what you're doing. Instead, you might say, hey, this person might find some weakness in what I'm doing, and that will give me the opportunity to be even better than I already am. That's wonderful. Thank you, critic. Just before this meeting, Michael Bolton, who is here with us, he was criticizing some of my work. And I thank him for that. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to make that slide better. And I began to study the dynamics of my heuristics so that I could know when to apply them. Because that's the key thing with a heuristic, is not just to know about it, not just to know it's fallible, but to know how it fails so that you can keep it from failing. And then I felt like I was more in control of my work. Heuristics, the nature of heuristics is they are always subordinate to the practitioner. My heuristics work for me. Your heuristics work for you. We don't work for the heuristics. That means when I manage other people and we talk about processes and policies and all this stuff, one of the key things I have to say to people that I'm leading is that our policies will be suspended if they aren't working for us. And so if I set a policy in my group and then I'm not around and you feel that policy is not working, just stop following the policy. And, you know, come talk to me. Let's work it out. Let's find a better policy. But don't follow any policy that is harming your process, harming your work. Don't just sit there, grit your teeth, and say, the boss says I have to do this. A leader in the technical world who understands heuristics and skills and human agency and how all those things work together is a leader who puts our methodology underneath the practitioner, never above them. But no, there are some minor exceptions. There are sometimes safety issues. There are sometimes legal issues that make certain kinds of policies more important than others, of course. But we don't encounter those in testing very much. Okay, so let me give you some example. Here's an example. The perimeter assumption. Now, you probably haven't heard of the perimeter assumption, but you use it. The reason you haven't heard of it is because I made up that name. The name you probably know it by is boundary testing or boundary value analysis. But what I'm saying is that the perimeter assumption is an underlying belief which makes boundary testing make sense. It gives boundary testing, a good 2/3 of its power comes from this thing which I call the perimeter assumption. And this is what the perimeter assumption is. If things are okay, way out there at the extremes, if you test at the extremes and you don't find failure, then certainly things are okay on the happy path. Maybe we don't need to test the happy path if we test the extremes. We'll just assume the happy path is fine. Now that's a heuristic. It's a heuristic that lots of people use. Think about it like a pickup truck. If you load a pickup truck with 1,000 kilograms of bricks, and it's able to carry these bricks on the road from point A to point B, then surely the pickup truck can also carry 3 bags of groceries from the market. Surely it can do that if it can carry all these bricks, right? That's the perimeter assumption. Now, the perimeter assumption is fallible because if you are carrying in your pickup truck a bucket of sulfuric acid and the sulfuric acid spills out, it will destroy or damage your truck. And that has nothing to do with how heavy it is. That has to do with its chemical nature. And then you realize, oh, okay, there's more to what a pickup truck can carry than just the amount of weight that it can deal with. Similarly, you can test something in the extremes and find that that's fine. It can deal with extremes. And then you try something very ordinary and you learn that the product is unusable and no one wants to use it, even though the system can technically handle it. Or there might be a particular kind of data, and that particular kind of data, that particular kind of input causes everything to crash, but not because of it being near a limit. Sometimes people say, and I've read this in books, testing books, people, actually this is in the ISTQB syllabus, or it was at one time, where I have read where they say, well, boundary testing is important because most bugs happen on boundaries. Wait, what? That's like saying most people die crossing the street. No, I don't think that's true. I think what's true about boundary bugs is that most boundary bugs happen at boundaries. I would say that's true. Not most bugs, but most boundary bugs. There are other kinds of bugs that have absolutely nothing to do with boundaries, and we can't say that there's more or less of that kind of bug than the other. It depends on the kind of software that you're doing. So, if you accept the perimeter assumption, it helps you solve the problem of where to put your security guards, right? Put them around the outside of your encampment. And if they don't find any orcs attacking Helm's Deep, then, probably there are no orcs inside of the perimeter. Can this fail? Absolutely, this can fail, as I've described. Let's use another example. Here's another very straightforward heuristic. Use a link checker. All right, that's a heuristic. Links on websites can be easily broken. Checking them by hand is boring and slow. Use an automatic link checker. Some people just say that's the best practice, as if it's infallible, as if it's always something that's worth doing. And, a lot of the times it is worth doing. That's definitely true. But you got to know how it can fail. I used a link checker on my own website, and look, it's finding a whole bunch of broken links. The thing is that most of these aren't problems, because most of them are links in comments. Now, I'm not going to go and edit the comments. A lot of these are old comments, and they're supplied links that are no longer valid. It's not my content. I don't feel like I need to go in and eliminate the link, because then it'll make the comment more difficult to process. And for all I know, these links that are bad might come back someday. Maybe they're only temporarily bad. In any case, it's not my problem. I think it's better for me to leave those alone. But the link checker doesn't know that. The link checker just checks all the links. 2, and only 2, of the reports on the link checker here referred to something that's actually a problem on my website at the time that I did this. I'm happy to find out about those 2, but I had to slog through the other things that were not problems in order to get to those 2. Furthermore, there are links on my site, it turns out, that went to the wrong place, but the link checker didn't tell me that. It can't check the semantics of a link. It can't check what the links meant, what the links were intended to do. That's got to be up to the human. So a link checker is a heuristic. We see that it is fallible in manifold ways. So that brings me to my last slide, and then I'll take questions. This is the secret of my success, you might say. I have embraced bootstrapping, where a lot of my colleagues seem to be suspicious of it. I've embraced it. I've embraced it as a heuristic. And I do that by not judging myself harshly when I'm at the beginning of a very complicated process. This has allowed me to do some, what to many people might seem like, astonishing things. I, for instance, once wrote a test report that was essentially 350 pages long and was read by 4 people in ever. And I can't even show it to you now without redacting most of it because it was full of confidential information. But it was for a court case, and I won the court case with this report. The report took me weeks and weeks and weeks to put together. It was hundreds of hours of work. It involved 250 or more footnotes. It was an extremely elaborate, precise, scholarly analysis of the software that I was asked to analyze. It was not easy to put together. But it didn't start out as a comprehensive report. It started out as me playing with the software. It started out with me not knowing what kind of report I was going to write, if any. And over the course of a 2-year period of time where I was working part-time on this project, it developed and it developed and developed until it came to its thunderous conclusion. Now, what if I didn't believe in bootstrapping? What if I believed that in order to do something as sophisticated as essentially write a book about a piece of software that would win a court case, that I had to know at the very beginning exactly how it was going to go, exactly what steps I would have to take? I would never get started because I didn't know what those steps would be. I had to discover them. That's what bootstrapping is. Now, bootstrapping is a heuristic because, it might fail. I might not end up doing something that I wanted to achieve when I bootstrapped. I might be trying to do something that turns out to be impossible. I don't know. But I embrace it as a heuristic. And I use modeling. I created a model of software testing back well, I've created many models, but the model that I'm famous for, I created way back in 1996, and I teach that model. And I use that as a heuristic for helping me rapidly analyze my testing projects and the products that I have to test in order to come up with a test strategy quickly. It's called the Heuristic Test Strategy Model. I created that model. From the moment I created that model, I began to feel in my bones like a testing expert. And I eagerly share this with people because I want to help other people feel like testing experts. I practice with the model. I have experience now. I do create procedures. I use procedures in my work. You know what I'm saying is all that stuff I told you at the start, at the very beginning, if we go all the way back up, the stuff about supervision, all this stuff is useful. I use that. I have some natural talent. There's other areas I don't have natural talent in. You might find if you Google about me, I don't appear to have a natural talent for charming people. I have to really work at my charm. It does not come easy. I seem to have a talent for upsetting people. Definitely, there are people who are upset by my behavior. I think I'm doing well, but not everyone agrees. So I can be an irascible guy. So I have some natural talents, other things not so natural. I have certain experiences, and then I lack experience in other areas. I've had a hell of a lot of practice of some kinds and not others. All these things are just as useful as I thought they were at the very beginning of my career. But the missing element that has come to define my career, you could fairly say, is this last bit, is heuristics. And it's so much so that I'll tell you this. When you've probably heard of Agile. Anyone out there heard of Agile? So Agile is this thing. when they were naming Agile. There was a time before Agile, it was about 2001, they were naming Agile. They're trying to find a name for it. And I was consulted about what they should call this. Jim Highsmith called me on the phone. He's one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto. And he and I had been friends, and we were talking about this group of guys, and they were trying to come up with a name for this way of development. And I suggested that you should call it the heuristic approach. That's what I said. And he said, that's a horrible name. We were thinking of calling it Agile. And they did. I think Agile is a better name than heuristic. It sounds better. I agreed with him as soon as he said Agile. In 1999, when Kem Kaner suggested that we should, that our community should come up with a name for our approach to testing, I suggested we should call ourselves the heuristic community. And he said, no, that's a horrible name. We should call ourselves the context-driven school of software testing. So that's what we ended up doing, context-driven, because no one likes the word heuristic. It is a word that doesn't sound very good. But I do think it is at the core of the great work that each of us does. And I suggest that if you take your heuristics seriously, you start labeling them, curating them, giving them names that you can talk about with other people, you will feel like an expert, you will sound like an expert, and you will have the effectiveness that expertise brings. All right, that's my slide set. So I'm ready for questions. I'll release my screen.
Hi, James. It's Michael. I think there's a wee issue. I'm not able to access Slido using that code. That code comes back as inactive for me, the one that's been posted in the chat.
Okay, I'll jump in quickly there, Michael. Thanks for highlighting that. I've had a couple of messages to say that. So we do have some questions that have come through on Slido. For those that are having those same problems and they're not able to do so, if you can just put your questions in the Zoom chat, and then we'll go through those one by one. So yeah, anybody with questions.
Zoom chat also disabled.
It says disabled.
Yeah.
Let's have a look.
Slido, it needs to be uppercase.
So what we're saying here is that Slido and Zoom are heuristics for having a good meetup. You see, they're not infallible.
It was all intentional.
That's right. It's all just to help demonstrate. I really appreciate the sacrifices that you've just made, Ashley, to demonstrate my point. I just feel really, really respected.
So the Zoom chat's open now, but I'll just run through the couple that we have on Slido already. So
yeah, okay, go ahead.
The first being, can you please share heuristics you use in your everyday job?
Well, I mean, all right. Here's a heuristic I use in my everyday job in working with clients and bosses. Okay? If they ask me to do something, I don't put a high priority on it until I'm asked a second time. If somebody asks me for something twice, they must really want it. So that's a heuristic I use for prioritizing. Here's another heuristic I use with my clients. If my clients ever ask me to do something that I think is unethical, or is bad work, then my heuristic is to remind them that I am a doctor and not a drug dealer. And the difference between a doctor and a drug dealer, you have to be ready to explain, is that one of those guys really cares about customer satisfaction, and the other one's a doctor. Doctors are interested in customer service, not necessarily customer satisfaction. Drug dealers are only interested in customer satisfaction. Otherwise, they would be selling you potatoes. but they've decided to sell morphine because, whoa, people really like morphine way more than potatoes. They're willing to pay a lot of money for morphine, for heroin, compared to potatoes. So that's why they're in the drug business, is customer satisfaction is so critical for them. But I'm not in that business. I don't obey for money. I do good work for money. And so that's a heuristic. And this heuristic is definitely fallible, because sometimes obedience, for obedience's sake, can be important. It can be worthwhile to allow you to get through a certain door so that you can do more good. And lots of people use a heuristic of not making waves, not upsetting people, because they've learned that that's an important aspect of getting along in the world and being able to support your family. I use a different heuristic because I have a different personality and a different value system, and I was raised a little differently than most. So I'm willing to, here's a key thing. Here's a heuristic. Get married to someone who believes in you, because I'm only able to be the difficult person I am in my work world because my wife supports me in doing that. She is completely behind me. And here's another heuristic: never go into business, never start a business that your wife isn't part of, because it's going to become your whole consuming life. I'm so glad that when I started my business, I gave it to my wife. She owns the business. We're in it together. We've been in it together for 20 years. So that's another heuristic. I can go on and on and on. I use so many heuristics in my life. You can pick any topic, any kind of work, and I'll give you a heuristic on that. Because I practice seeing these heuristics everywhere, and then to turn them around in my mind and try to use them on purpose instead of using them only intuitively and accidentally.
Perfect. So let's have a look then. Moving on. Do you think AI could be used to aid testers in using stroke identifying applicable heuristics to given context?
Any tool can. I mean, you can use a piece of paper with heuristics written on it as a tool to identify heuristics. So if you can use a piece of paper, surely you can use AI as well. Of course, what you mean by AI is not clear. Mostly these days when people say AI, what they mean is machine learning. They mean neural network type stuff. Could you use a neural network to identify heuristic? Sure, you could. You would have to situate that very specifically. But I think it's probably generally a bad idea to use AI. I'm certainly could be convinced by a particular person at a particular time. But I'm working for Tricentis now. I'm on a contract with Tricentis to create a new kind of test tool, what I call a personal test tool. A test tool that will help you think better as a tester. So this is actually a really big deal for me right now. I'm thinking of everything I can do to make you think better as a tester. I'm so far not seeing a way to use machine learning for that, but I'm still researching, and if I find a way, I'm going to add it to this special testers workbench that I'm designing right now.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then, are test techniques heuristics?
Yes. I assume Michael Bolton typed that in, or one of my students, or one of my colleagues, and you're giving me a softball question to remind me to say that. I might have forgotten to say that. Every test technique is a heuristic. Absolutely. Every test technique is a heuristic. Whatever the technique is, it's a heuristic. So there's a good game you can play to pick any technique and then say about that technique, what is this technique trying to accomplish? What problem is it trying to solve? And then ask yourself, is it infallible? Is there no way it can fail? Or is it reliant on certain things that might not be provided? Like, for instance, state-based testing. Well, that's a technique. All right. Is it guaranteeing to find every state-based bug? Well, no, because state-based bugs include things that aren't on your state model. So, a state that should never be accessible because it shouldn't even exist. Well, there's no way that state-based testing can find every single state that shouldn't exist, because that's like saying, I'm going to search this house to find rooms that shouldn't exist. Well, how do you know when you've searched every room that you've seen every secret room? You don't know that you found every secret room. So, at least not by searching inside the house. You would have to somehow scan the outside of the house, compare it to the inside of the house, and then you'd have to poke through and x-ray things to see if that's solid wood, or maybe that's a secret entrance, or a secret doorway or something. Everything is heuristic if you use your testing intelligence to analyze how it could fail. And then once you know that, you can use that technique in a responsible way. Now, here's another heuristic. Have Michael Bolton come to be your colleague and come to all your talks, because he's just privately messaged me to remind me to mention that he and I teach testing classes where we talk about this stuff. And he's trying to remind me just to mention that, so I'm just going to mention that. I do teach these classes. In fact, this is how I make a living. Other than working with Tricentis and other clients, I teach online classes. He does too. You can go to our website, satisfice.com, developsense.com, or rapidsoftwaretesting.com, and you'll find where our classes are. That's all I'm going to say that's of a commercial nature. Now I'm going to go back to helping you and answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Is it correct to say that the link between bootstrapping, the mental model, and heuristics are that you start with bootstrapping to develop a mental model, which then becomes a heuristic to use?
That is one way to connect these. But you can also play games with changing all that around to every possible combination. You could say that having a pre-existing mental model allows you to successfully bootstrap to develop heuristics. Or you could say that our brain is a heuristic that allows us to conceive of mental models, which leads to other heuristics, and creates the bootstrapping. You can put them in any order. They've done studies of infants and dogs to show that infants and dogs already have built into their brains at birth a basic understanding of how physics works. So, and they can tell, because they can tell that a baby is surprised when a ball goes behind a screen and then doesn't come out the other side, or a dog is surprised when the ball doesn't come out the other side. How can they be surprised? Unless they have some sort of inbuilt understanding or mental model of physics. So you could say it's a big chicken and egg thing. Is it that we start with mental models? Is it is the bootstrapping heuristic itself the thing that started all life on Earth? So I wouldn't say that any one of these is preeminent. I would say that they're all swirling together in a wonderful vortex.
Perfect, thank you. I can see there's a couple of people that are asking for recommendations of blog or further references and reading, but just if you look through the chat function, I can see that Michael shared a link to...
Yeah, Michael's going to be typing in links as I go, because that's part of how he and I support each other. When he's speaking and I'm attending, I will be typing links in. it's wonderful
Yeah.
to have a colleague helping me out here.
Perfect. Just wanted to direct everyone to that, just to see.
Can
the
I
links
answer this
through
one
that.
about how do you avoid cognitive bias?
Yeah, sure.
It's important to understand that biases and heuristics are the same thing. Think about that. A bias, you could say bias is just another word for heuristic. Heuristic is another word for bias. And if you have to squint a little bit, but then when you see that is true, it's quite powerful. Every heuristic consists of a bias that is urging you toward a good answer to a question, a good solution to a problem, and biasing you away from things that aren't good solutions. But the flip side of that coin is every heuristic is also could be a bias that harms you. Cognitive biases are built in to our cognitive framework. Optical illusions, for instance, are a consequence of the limited machinery of our eyes and our optic nerves. We aren't like video cameras just seeing everything equally. We're biased towards seeing certain kinds of things. This helps us see things, and it also fools our eyes and makes us see things that aren't there. And so, yes, we can have heuristics for debiasing. For instance, one debiasing heuristic that I use is I show my work to my friends before I show it to you. And they identify certain mistakes that I've made because they're thinking about it in a different way than I am. They have what we call critical distance from my work. I don't have critical distance from my work. I'm too close to my work sometimes. So to get distance from it and thus be able to see something that I'm biased against seeing, I need a third party to look at my stuff. So I'll have a student look at it, or any enemies look at it. I put stuff out on LinkedIn and have it be abused, whatever. And that will help me become aware of my biases. And this is particularly important these days because now we're talking about racism, for instance, in a much more deep way than we have before, and I want to be a good person. I want to be someone who, if I have privileges, then I want to use those privileges for the betterment of humankind. And so I need to become aware of how I might be blind to the pain of other people, and to do what I can and do what's reasonable to avoid that or to fix it if I can. The older I get, the more I'm concerned with society and the implications of my little piece of my little world to society at large.
Excellent, fantastic. Thanks for that. I can also see that Michael's answered a few questions on there in the chat function as well. I guess that are slightly irrelevant to the talk or on slightly different topics. So I'll share the transcript with everybody afterwards as well, so
Yeah.
they can run through those answers as well. We've got one more here that says all roles now have bigger intersections. Dev testings and writing stories, PO talking about API, QA coding, and so on. How do you see the QA role in a continuous deployment environment?
Well, I would say that the testing role, because I prefer not to say QA. If I say QA, what I mean is quality assistance, I suppose, quality analysis. But I call myself a tester because quality is it doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to testing. It's all of us are interested in quality, right? But testing is a special thing. Yeah, everybody can test. Anybody can test. But the testing role is a heuristic for bringing focus to the testing activity, for bringing focus and competence and readiness and coordination to the testing activity. If you don't have a testing role, if you say everybody's job is testing, then I predict that no one will be good at testing because no one will study testing. No one will feel pride in their testing because no one's identity is caught up in being a good tester. Instead, people will gravitate towards development and design, and they will judge themselves on that basis. And then you have this tragedy of the commons thing where everything else becomes a higher priority than testing. And then when people do test, they're not ready to test. They haven't prepared to test. So they have bad test data. They have poor testability. And they end up doing shallow testing only. Now, shallow testing is not bad testing. Shallow testing can be very good. But if you have a situation where you never do deep testing, that could be a terrible vitamin deficiency in your testing regime. So I think a testing role, that is to say, someone in the organization needs to specialize in testing. Have the testing specialist role is a heuristic for getting and coordinating all the testing that's done even by part-time amateur people in the organization. All of that will go better if at least one person is a testing geek, you might say. Similarly, look, if you're going to paint a house and you have one person who's a house painting geek, who's an expert at it, 20 people can help paint a house, and it's going to go a lot better if at least one person knows what they're doing and cares about the quality of the job and knows the difference between good paint and bad paint, and a good painting job and a bad painting job. Because I don't know. I'm happy to help you paint your house, but I don't know what good and bad is when it comes to painting. Don't ask me. I don't care. When it comes to cooking, I don't care. I like eating stuff. I'm not a cook. I'm not interested in cooking, but my wife is really into it. And I recommend marry someone who's a good cook if you aren't, because life will be really good for you compared to what it otherwise might be if nobody in your family is a good cook. Basically, try to hang out with people who have different strengths than yours. Oh, you know that heuristic that says that you should always surround yourself with people who are smarter than you? It's a really dumb idea. Don't do that. If you think about that for 5 minutes, you'll realize why that's a bad idea. Because, I mean, the first question is, why would these smart people want to hang out with you? I mean, shouldn't they be surrounding themselves with people smarter than them? And you aren't, by your own admission. So how smart can these people be if they're willing to work for you or work with you? The better way to say it is, surround yourself by people who are differently talented than yourself. Surround yourself with people who are different than you, who can give you something you don't already have, and that you can give them something you don't already have. That is the superior heuristic.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, James. I think we may have cleared off all of the questions there. Looks like
all right, thanks, guys.
Helped answer some of those as well. So thank you, Michael, for joining us as well and filtering through those. As I say, with everybody, I will share the transcript from the Zoom chat so you can see the references in there. I think there's also a link through to the classes that James teaches, if anybody is interested in joining those. Any other questions that come up outside of this, feel free to send me a message or contact me anyway, and I'll try to get those answered for you. But until the next time, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you again, James and Michael, and I'll share all of the links for the video with you all shortly. Take care, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.